Hello, I'm Deborah Goggin with the Department of Research Support at A.T. Still University. In this presentation, I will explain how to write a research article for submission to a journal. Let's start with a basic overview of the required content of a scientific journal article. Scientific articles follow the MRAD format, which stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. This structure helps readers understand your study by introducing your research topic and study purpose, explaining what you did, reporting what you found, and then discussing how your study contributes to existing literature or clinical practice. When drafting a journal article, you may not write it in this exact order. It is more likely the methods and results will be written first. You can also think about this MRAD structure for journal articles in a more visual way, like an hourglass. Imagine your introduction is like a funnel that gives readers context for your study. You start by providing broad, general information about the research area, and then you can be more specific about the exact topic area of your study. The introduction generally ends with a statement about the study objective or purpose. In this way, information funnels from the more general to the more specific. Next, imagine your methods and results as the narrow neck of the hourglass. These two sections of a journal article provide readers with very specific, narrow, focused information about your study. Finally, imagine the discussion like a cone, because it starts with very specific summary information about the main findings of your study. It then expands to discuss why your study should be important for readers and what your results mean for overall research and practice. In this way, information expands from the more specific to the more general. Let's look at this structure more closely, starting with the introduction. In general, your introduction should not be very long. Of the four main MRAD sections, the introduction should be the shortest. The general convention is that your introduction will have about 3 paragraphs. So what exactly should be in those 3 paragraphs? The first paragraph should be a general introduction to your research topic area. This paragraph should provide readers with context. What does that mean? It means you want to provide a basic overview of the research area and the general scope of the problem. In this paragraph, give your readers information about the most important general details of your research area so they know what your study will focus on. The second paragraph should briefly discuss existing studies related to your research topic area. This paragraph should not be an in-depth literature review. So what kind of information should you provide? Give your readers relevant details about existing studies that are related to your study. For example, summarize what the study investigated and its main findings. If the study had limitations that reduced its applicability, briefly convey that information to readers. This paragraph should start to funnel the reader's attention from general information about your research topic area to the specific information they need to know to understand your study. The third and final paragraph of the introduction completes the flow of information toward your study purpose. Often, this paragraph begins with a few transition statements that show readers how the information in the previous paragraphs is related to your study and how unanswered questions or limitations of those studies make your study necessary. The introduction ends with the stated purpose of your study. Depending on the target journal you are submitting to, you may also need to include a study hypothesis after the purpose statement. The next section of the manuscript is the methods. The purpose of this section is to inform the reader about what you did in your study. Therefore, you need to provide your readers with enough detail so they can understand what you did and evaluate the scientific merit of your study. Because the primary purpose of the methods section in a journal article is to document what you did, other researchers should be able to read your methods and then exactly repeat your study. Research should be reproducible. So what kind of information should be provided in this section? There are several main categories of information that should be included in the methods. You should tell readers what kind of study design you used and describe the specific population or experimental condition you were investigating. Explain how you recruited your population or chose your experimental group. Provide thorough details about your study variables and outcomes. Make sure that your variables and outcomes are explicitly defined in this section. The methods is also the part of the article where you establish the specific wording you will be using for each variable and outcome, and the specific order you will use when discussing your variables and outcomes in the rest of the article. Finally, the methods should describe how you collected your data and how you analyzed it. The methods is also the section of the article where journals want information about institutional review board approval or exemption for human participant studies, or information about animal care committee oversight for animal studies. For studies with human participants, you need to also make sure you mentioned informed consent in this section. The next section of the manuscript is the results. This section should clearly report your study findings. Make sure that you are using the wording and order of variables and outcomes established in the methods section. This consistency of wording between MRAD sections allows readers to easily group content between sections. The results section is obviously very data focused. You'll want to use a combination of text and tables and figures to present your results. In general, the results text should focus on the results you want to stress the most. The tables and figures help to highlight the most important results, but they should also include all study data. You cannot selectively report only results you think are important. You have to report all your results. For human participants research, this section usually starts with a summary of the demographic characteristics of your study population, so readers can evaluate the merit of subsequent results. Another important point to remember when writing the results is that you should not report all data from a table or figure in the text. The text of the results is meant to be a high-level snapshot of important findings that you want your readers to notice. If you exactly repeat all data from a table in the text, then what was the point of the table? The discussion section is where you bring all the pieces of your article together and place your study findings within the context of the existing literature. Journal articles are a scientific conversation, and the discussion is where you really engage your readers in that conversation. Generally, the first paragraph of the discussion section should remind readers of your study purpose and briefly summarize the main findings of your study. It's been a while since they read the introduction, so remind your readers why you did your study and then show how your study results support that purpose. Once you have provided this grounding context, you can begin orienting your findings within the existing literature. You can do that by comparing and contrasting your findings with other studies. Maybe explain how your data supports those studies. Maybe explain how it contradicts other studies. In general, you want to provide readers with this compare and contrast discussion for each of your main findings. Every discussion section should also include a paragraph about your study limitations. Don't ignore this section. Acknowledging your study limitations adds to the scientific rigor of your study, and readers are more likely to consider your findings more favorably because you acknowledged your study limitations. This paragraph can sometimes naturally lead into another paragraph about future studies. For example, future studies may be able to address your study limitations. Or maybe your research topic area in general needs more studies to improve the overall scientific rigor of the research. Finally, make sure your discussion section conveys to readers what your results mean. You could indicate what your result means for practice or future research. Think about why your study was important, why readers should care, and what they can do with your results. Although this is the last bullet point here, it does not mean this is the last part of the discussion. Each discussion paragraph should tell readers what your results mean and why they are important. This brings us to the conclusion section of the article. Although the conclusion is not typically included in the MRAD format of journal articles, it is usually a requested section of a journal submission. So let's talk about it. Think of the conclusion as your study blurb. Like the engaging summary on the back of a book, your conclusion should succinctly tell readers what your study was all about. Therefore, the conclusion should provide a high-level summary of your study purpose and how the main findings address that purpose. Think about what you want readers to take away from your study, and make sure that takeaway message is clearly expressed in the conclusion. To figure out your study's takeaway point, think about how you would describe the entire study in a single sentence. What is the most exciting thing that you found? Tell your readers about it. Finally, the conclusion may be the first or only section of your article that a reader reads. So make it strong and memorable. Make the reader want to read the rest of the article to find out more about your study. Another main section of a journal article is the abstract. The abstract is a mini version of the overall article. Think of it like a snapshot of your study. Since the abstract is placed at the beginning of a published journal article, you might be wondering why we're talking about it last. Well, the abstract is easier to write after you have completed a draft of your full article. Once you have the necessary information in each MRAD section of your article, you can figure out the most important things about your study to include in the abstract. Because abstracts have word limits, you have to be selective about the information you provide. Since your abstract is meant to be a quick snapshot of your study, its content should be very methods and results focused. You should provide just enough methods information to make your abstract results understandable to readers. Because this is a brief summary of the overall study, you can only emphasize the main findings of your study. When reporting your study results in the abstract, make sure to support your statements with actual numerical data. Just stating that your intervention improved outcomes is not enough for readers to evaluate the validity of that statement. They need data for that, so make sure to provide it. Let's get more specific about abstracts. There are two types of abstracts: structured abstracts and unstructured abstracts. A structured abstract is written with subheadings that provide detailed information related to each MRAD section of your article. A full structured abstract uses all the subheadings listed here. Depending on the journal, you may or may not use all these subheadings. Sometimes context, objectives, methods, results, and conclusions are the only abstract subheadings the journal wants. Because the subheadings of structured abstracts add additional words to the abstract, you need to be mindful of word limits. Fortunately, it is acceptable to use sentence fragments for some subheadings. For example, you could provide cross-sectional after the design subheading, or secondary school after the setting subheading. The next type of abstract is an unstructured abstract. This type of abstract should provide the same MRAD information as a structured abstract or your main article. However, this abstract type provides that information as a paragraph with no subheadings. Many books and articles have been published about how to write a journal article. I have provided a selection of 3 such articles that complement the information described in previous slides. I chose these specific articles as examples because they provide good suggestions about the type of content to include in each section of your article. The first article also provides good time management strategies to help you finish writing your article in a timely fashion. The second article focuses on strategies that you can use to make your discussion section stronger. And the third article provides good tips for the kind of information that should be included in each section of an article. Some of the suggested tips are specific to writing an article for the Journal of Athletic Training, but the overall content can be applied to any article written for any journal. For more articles, simply search your favorite publication database, such as PubMed. Another source with good suggestions for writing your article is the Equator Network. This network provides specific guidelines and helpful checklists for a variety of different types of articles, such as systematic reviews or case studies. Each guideline provides detailed information about the content that should be included in each MRAD section for that type of article. Consulting these guidelines and associated checklists may also be beneficial during the writing process to make sure you have included the necessary information in each MRAD section. Most journals recommend that submitted articles follow the guidelines provided by the Equator Network. For example, if you are writing about a randomized controlled trial, you would want to follow CONSORT guidelines. If you are writing a systematic review, you would want to follow PRISMA guidelines. Search the Equator Network through the provided URL to find out more. When writing a journal article, there are additional considerations that you need to be aware of and make sure that they are addressed or included in your article. First, let's talk about authorship. Journals and professional organizations have very specific requirements for determining who can be an author of a journal article, and it is very important that you follow those current standards for authorship. So how do you do this? The ICMJE is a professional organization concerned with the writing and publication of research articles. To that end, they have provided very clear definitions of which contributors should be listed as authors on a journal article. The ICMJE also provides very specific instructions for acknowledgement of study contributors who do not qualify for authorship. Examples of contributors who should be acknowledged but not listed as authors are people who collected study data or edited your article. You can find out more by searching the ICMJE website for defining the role of authors and contributors. Research ethics is another important consideration when writing a journal article. What does that mean? Briefly, you should strive to be objective and transparent about your study and your study results. Good research ethics also means that all authors are accountable and accept responsibility for the conduct of the study and the reporting of its outcomes. If your study and your article follow good ethical practices, then readers can feel confident that the presented information is an accurate representation of your study and that steps have been taken to avoid bias and mitigate potential conflicts of interest. You can learn more about this topic in the current GPP guidelines, which can be accessed through the provided URL. These guidelines explain the ethical practices that should be followed throughout the research process to ensure the study has scientific rigor and applicability for the scientific community and the general population. The ORI is also a good resource to consult when writing your article to make sure you are following ethical practices when discussing results of other studies. The ORI has an in-depth learning module that explains how to correctly paraphrase other studies and how to avoid text recycling and self-plagiarism. You can access this module, Avoiding Plagiarism, Self-Plagiarism, and Other Questionable Writing Practices, A Guide to Ethical Writing, by searching the ORI website. Since most journals use plagiarism detection software, it is important to make sure your article will not be flagged. So now that you have a better understanding of the required parts of a journal article and the requirements of ethical research you should consider when writing your article, let's move on to the next step of writing a journal article. That step involves consulting the author's instructions for your target journal. This is a very important point. You need to follow the journal's instructions as closely as possible. Doing so ensures your article has the best chance of being accepted for publication. So let's look more closely at some of the specific things you should pay attention to in author instructions. Let's start with the title page of your article. Journals usually have very specific instructions about the information they want on the title page. The basic information provided on this page is your article title, author list, author affiliations, and corresponding author information. Journals can also ask for financial disclosure and conflict of interest statements on the title page. Sometimes the journal uses a double-blind review. In that case, you need to be aware that your title page should not be included with the main text because it would unblind the submission. Journals also have very specific word limit requirements, which apply separately to the abstract and to the main text. Word limits for the main text are generally for the introduction through conclusion sections. In other words, the abstract, references, and tables and figures are excluded from that word count. However, you need to read the instructions because that is not always the case. Also, be aware that some journals allow a limited number of references in your article. If the journal limits references to 30, you don't want to submit an article with 50 references. In that instance, your article will probably be automatically rejected because it does not meet journal requirements. So what are some other journal instructions to be aware of to make sure your article has the best chance of being published? First, you should be aware of general formatting instructions. Journals tend to be very specific about the typeface of the text, the font size, and the line spacing. For example, they typically want submitted articles to be in Times New Roman at 12 point with double line spacing. There will also be specific formatting instructions for the abstract. With a few exceptions, most journals use structured abstracts and have specific subheadings they prefer. Journals also require information on financial disclosures and conflicts of interests, and they mostly have very specific wording requirements for those disclosures and specific instructions about where they want those disclosures placed in your article. Disclosures are typically placed on the title page or just before the references. Which leads us to the references. Journals always have a specific way they want references cited in the text and listed in the reference list. Make sure to follow those instructions. Another formatting requirement to be aware of is which style manual the journal uses for overall formatting, wording, and structure. Most medical and health sciences journals follow American Medical Association or AMA style, or they follow American Psychological Association or APA style. If a journal states they follow ICMJE, which, if you remember from a previous slide, stands for the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, then that means the journal follows AMA style. I have one final comment about following journal instructions. Don't think that following instructions to the letter is unnecessary because the journal will change things later anyway. This is not the case. Don't expect the journal editors or the reviewers to revise your article for you during the peer review process. That is a good way to get your article rejected. Being able to follow instructions is one way journals separate the wheat from the chaff. It subtly tells the journal editors that your article is likely to have scientific merit because you took the time to carefully follow their instructions. Strive to make your article meet all journal requirements. But if that is not possible, which sometimes happens, do the best you can. For instance, it is common for journals to have contradictory instructions. In those cases, use your best judgment about which instructions to follow. Or you could also email the journal editor and ask for clarification. My final suggestion for writing journal articles involves revision. Revision is the most important final step for any type of writing. Revision is about re-seeing your article content, and it is definitely more than copy editing for correct grammar and mechanics usage. When revising the content of your article, consider whether the existing words convey the message you want them to. You may need to review sentence by sentence. When you are revising is also a good time to deeply consider your science and make sure that it is correctly conveyed in the article. Finally, accept that revision is an ongoing process. Don't be discouraged. You will likely need multiple revisions before your article is ready to submit to the journal. But each revision makes your article stronger and increases its chances of publication. Are you an ATSU faculty researcher? Do you have a research project that you would like assistance with? The Department of Research Support can help. Our staff can assist with research coordination and project management, statistical analysis, and manuscript editing. You can find out more about our department through the provided URL.